my AirPods, and I find this book on Audible by John Maxwell. Great leadership author. I flipped to this chapter that's like incredibly titled, "What is Leadership?" It was like the perfect answer to my question, right? I click on that, and the first 3 words out of his mouth in that chapter were "leadership is influence." And that kind of stopped me for a second, because it sounds right. Like, it sounds pretty good, but I'm super nerdy, and I wanted to figure out, like, how truthy is it? Like, what's the logic behind it? How can he prove this? And so the logic follows like this. In order to have a leader, there is one requirement: to have a follower. And in order to have a follower, you have to have influenced somebody somehow. And so that's really interesting, because if you want to become a better leader and more influential, then you have to look at the different ways you can get it. You can get it through authority, you can get it through a title, or you can get it through being useful to others, value-based leadership, where they're learning something from you, they want to be around you because you bring them some sort of value. And so for me personally, I want to be the type of leader where people follow me based on the value I bring them. I want to be useful to people. And so my question now is, all right, if leadership is influence, and people are going to follow me because I'm bringing them more value, how do I become more valuable? And how did some of these leaders become more valuable in order to go from entry-level engineers or interns all the way up to running these huge companies? And so I get on this call with the senior vice president of Canon, the imaging company, and his name's Dennis. And this call was amazing, because when it loaded, he's got this like slicked back hair, these giant gold rings, and he's calling in from Long Island with a thick accent. He looked like a straight mob boss, right? And so his looks, though, were not the most memorable thing about him. The most memorable thing about Dennis was when we started talking about value and how to become more valuable. He credits his entire success of his career, the entire path of leveling up from individual contributor, team lead, leader of leaders, C-level, to this one specific habit that he's intentionally deployed throughout his whole career. And so here's how it goes. This is how you'll execute this habit. The first thing he does is he goes to his stakeholder. And he says very specifically, what skill or habit would make me more valuable to the team or the organization? Now, usually when you do this, what will happen is the person will be caught off guard a little bit, and they'll say, "Oh, just do good at your job." To see. So you have to dig a little bit deeper to figure out what exactly that takeaway is from your stakeholder that you can then go and work on. So that's step 1, is figure out what it is. Step 2, he then goes and works on it. Sometimes in his career, he can work on it at work. Sometimes in his career, he has to do it outside of work. But his goal is to become more valuable. So step 3 is the most important part, because steps 1 and 2 are pretty logical, right? Let's go ask what it is, and then let's go do it. But step 3 is important, and there's a small differentiator that I believe made a big difference. Is as he's developing this habit, as he's doing this thing the stakeholder said would make him more valuable to the team or the organization, he's constantly communicating back to that individual the story, the progress of what he's doing on this journey of obtaining that. Because without that, what happens, what it looks like to the other party, what it looks like to your stakeholder, is that, I said what could make me more valuable, you told me, and then I go off in the dark and disappear for a year, right? So this way it builds the story of, oh, this individual's trying, whether it's on a weekly basis or a bi-weekly basis, however you're choosing to communicate back. But it builds this image in the stakeholder's head that this individual wants to become more valuable, because everybody says they do, knows what it is, which everybody does through one-on-ones, or they try to figure out in a lazy way. But the third thing is the second thing is they dug into it to find out really deeply what it was, and then they actually executed it and built a picture in the individual's head of them obtaining this. This is literally the formula, if you look at it from a physics standpoint. This is the mathematical formula for how you could go from a janitor to the CEO, right? Every single level, you just become more valuable. After you become more valuable, the natural thing that happens is, because we're humans, right? We're not all computers yet. But the natural thing that happens as humans become more valuable, at least for the first time, with our default operating system programming, is that we get ego rises. It's just what happens. You become more. If I make someone more valuable constantly and they become more valuable, their ego begins to rise. So it's important to note that as you're becoming more valuable, you have to stay humble and outcome driven. Now, I didn't make this up. I learned this from a CTO of Stitch Fix, Kathy Polinsky. So how many of you have Stitch Fix? Great. Stitch Fix is an AI that dresses you. So essentially, it learns what your style likes, and then sends you clothes in a box. And so they have it for men, women, kids, they have it for everyone now. It grew rapidly, so when this call started, it was very different. When this call started, usually, just to give you some background, it's usually a single individual, right? Maybe a PR person hiding in the corner with their Zoom video off and their mic muted. But this call loaded, and there were 5 of the most well-dressed women I have ever seen in my entire life. And I thought to myself, maybe I'm in the wrong Zoom call. So I slacked Jake and my producer, and he's like, no, this is the right one. And then instantly after that thought, I realized, okay, I'm in the right call. Why? Why did this happen? Why was it Brady Bunch style? Why have I done 250 of these and it's always one person video? What's different about Kathy's style? What is she doing differently within her teams and her organizations that she comes with this whole crew? And so as the interviewer, I start diving deep into that area. And what I find is very interesting. She uses this concept of humble and outcome driven. So what she's doing is she's constantly scanning her teams, the people in her teams and her organization, for people who are technically competent, right? They're talented technically. They are humble about it, and they are always focused on the outcome. So she looks for these attributes within the people in her organization, and this is how she chooses to invest into her people. These are the traits that they're expressing, that when she sees this happening, she says, I'm going to invest opportunity, I'm going to invest time and resources into growing these people. And here's what happens behavioral-wise. The other individuals in the organization see that that is what the leader values. And so those are the behaviors they begin to replicate. And then it creates this gravity because your vibe attracts your tribe, right? And then you start attracting more people. So what happens as you scale engineering to the thousands or the tens of thousands is you get these teams stacked with humble, outcome-driven people who are technically competent, which that's what we want on our teams, right? So the way you get that, the tactical takeaway, is by choosing to invest your time and resources into the people who are expressing the behaviors that you want more of. So a little recap. We talked a little bit about what leadership is, its influence. We want to be value-based leaders, not authoritarian-based leaders. In order to become more valuable to people, we have to know from the stakeholder what to do and develop these things within our teams and our organizations and ourselves. As we do that, we have to stay humble and outcome-driven as we rise throughout the organization. And even as our team members rise throughout the organization and people we're mentoring up, we have to make sure that we help them stay humble and outcome-driven. But all of this means nothing without the last piece. And so the last piece comes from the CTO of Microsoft, Kevin Scott. Now, Kevin's interesting. He started in a very small town, 1,200 people, writing some code on an old computer, right? And then he got a job at a startup called Google, and he was an entry-level engineer. And then he became a team lead and grew at Google. And then he started at LinkedIn at a startup. And then LinkedIn sells for billions of dollars, and so to Microsoft, and then he meets Satya. And now he's the first CTO of the entire Microsoft organization in 23 years. So that spot, global CTO or entire CTO of Microsoft, has been vacant for 23 years until about 2 or 3 years ago when Kevin Scott took it. He is very good at vision and discipline. Those are the takeaways from the time I spent with Kevin. So vision, I think, by default has a very ambiguous context, right? I didn't like it. At least, I've been writing code for 17 years, and so whenever I'd hear vision statements and all of that, I'd be like, whatever. But, because it was ambiguous to me. But how I cleared it up after talking to all of these great leaders is pretty simple. It's your imagination. We all have it. When you decided to come to this event, when you were invited and the opportunity came up, you imagined how you would feel. Like, what would it be like? And then you chose to attend. When our friends ask us to dinner or events, our imagination just kicks in. It's a default thing that we just have embedded inside of us. So if you want to learn more about that default thing, there's plenty of books on vision, but I highly suggest it. And I just like to bring up this little side note about it, because for me, for 30 years, it was very unclear about what it is. And I realized, it's just our imagination. So he's very good at that, and he's very good at imagining where he wants to be. Like, he knew where he wanted to go at every level in his career. And then he has the second part, which is discipline. Another thing that was very difficult for me to understand, because I used to think discipline was getting spanked by your parents, like getting punished by your parents. It was something you didn't want, and something that happened when you did something bad, right? But as an adult and having kids, I've rewired the definition of discipline to something that is more effective for me, that I can leverage, and that is, it's the ability for me to make myself do something that I know is good for me, even when I don't want to do it. That's the moment of like discipline for me. And so when I'm practicing that, I'm always looking for where's the thing I know I should do, but I feel that resistance, that pull from it, and then push through it and build discipline. Another fun fact about discipline, very useful for me, that I've experienced personally, that I've talked with all these leaders about, is it's tied across your entire life. So discipline in one area of your life affects discipline in other areas of your life. Your discipline in your finances or your health also affects your discipline in your craft that you're mastering.